How do you go about dividing the teams for Friday night's game?
We took a line first, and we tried to two-platoon as much as we could. We have had agreement with whoever's, we haven't appointed the coaches yet. They'll flip for it later. Have agreement that they have to change teams entirely at the end of 12 minutes of each quarter. We have tried to divide the teams equal. However, it's almost impossible. In fact, it's impossible to tell. At the present time, I'm looking at our blue team and gold team. I wouldn't know myself who would win the game.
We have a distinguished guest here today with us at the University of Chattanooga, Coach Harold Wilkes, the end coach. Can you make any comments on the spring game coming up Friday night between Coach Gary and Coach Nardo? I understand that Coach Nardo has never won a spring game. Can you make any comments about this?
Well, I don't know for sure about that, never won a game, but Coach Gary, he puts in a few trick plays every now and then, and he will break the rules if you don't watch it real close. And of course, Coach Nardo, he's always played a good game. They've come in good, and the teams are divided well this year. And I believe the boys will really go at each other. I hope so.
Harold was a great guy. He might have been too good. He might have been too good a guy. I'm not sure whether he was tough enough, but he was a great guy and a great ball player.
My freshman year, Coach Wilkes was a senior. Harold Wilkes was a senior. The next year, he took over the end position. He was my coach, position coach. And he told me, never will forget this little story. He had told me, he says, Ronnie, he said, let me show you a little technique that looks good and sounds good, but it won't hurt either one of us tackling. So it was an easy tackle, not a very enthusiastic looking tackle. But he was my coach the following year. And I said, are we still using that same technique? He said, no, we're getting away from that technique. So we got into the real tackling drills with Coach Wilkes after that.
Harold Wilkes was my position coach. I played tight end, defensive end. He was my position coach. I loved it. You know, he took care of me. I mean, he was just really good to me when I was a freshman, you know, and getting used to being, you know, down here. And, you know, he was young, he was a young coach, and he had a lot of energy, you know, taught you well.
If anybody knew how to coach the ends, he could do it. And he was always nothing but good to me. I never had a crossword with him or anything. Of course, I didn't have a crossword with any of the coaches, but you know, Harold was a great guy. He was a great coach, and I think everybody respected him.
He was a good guy and a great leader, and had a very successful career here at UTC.
Coach Gary, how many years have you been a coach in a blue gold game?
This will be my 11th year as one of the coaches in the blue and gold game. Coach Nardo and I have had a long rivalry.
Have you a planned game strategy for Friday night?
No, I have not planned any game strategy for Friday night. For this reason, Coach Moore has not yet flipped the coin to decide which team I'm going to coach, the blue or the gold. So therefore, I do not know the personnel that I'm going to have, and will have to wait until that is decided before I maybe try to put some little thing in there to foul up Coach Nardo's strategy.
How many of these encounters have you won?
Well, I think I've won 10 of them. I've been very lucky. Coach Moore always takes his younger coach and gives him the better material. And I've had, in the 10 games that I've been in, that coin has come my way, and I know the personnel pretty well. I always went with the boys that I thought would give you 110% all the way in each game, and I've been very fortunate that
our team has won every game.
My best friend in high school was Pete Geary, and his uncle was the offensive backfield coach and kicking coach. He came from Georgia. Matter of fact, he's a heck of a player at Georgia. I think he's in the Hall of Fame at Georgia. And that year, they had the National Football Coaches Association in Atlantic City. So when Joe came up, he went up and visited his brother, which is Atlantic City was probably about maybe 3-hour drive, Pennsylvania, Spring City, Pennsylvania. And that's how they found out about me and I got a twin brother.
Joe was tough. He would give me the blues. I ran patterns, and he would have something to say about the way I either ran the pattern or what I did. He constantly gave me the blues. So what I would do intentionally is he would stand in the defensive backfield. He was a defensive backfield coach. In scrimmages and practice, he'd be towards the end of the backfield. I would intentionally run my routes to run people into him so that he'd have to get out of the way.
Oh yeah. Joe Gary was my punting coach, and when I came into here, and Joe was a feisty kind of guy that knew what you should be able to do in his pro atmosphere that he played in. I had a lot of interaction with him because we would take about 15 minutes a day at least, and we would work together. And I would punt for the corner of the end zone and do this and do that. And he was quickly to tell me in his own verbiage if I didn't do it correctly, okay? So we always knew, I don't need to upset Coach Gary, okay? So that's for sure.
Like all of the coaches back in the day, they were hard-nosed. He was hard-nosed. He expected a lot. He didn't have much room for error, and he pushed you really hard. But at the same time, I think we knew that, he was trying to make us be as good as we could possibly be. But he sure could rub you the wrong way in a hurry. He stayed on you, and he stayed on you hard.
I found out pretty quick that he was a real good athlete, and he was tough. He was a tough guy, and I appreciated that. And I'll have to tell you, I was a little bit afraid of him at first. But it didn't take long to know that his bark was a whole lot worse than his bite, and but he wasn't afraid to get in the players' faces and straighten them out when he got out there. If they weren't doing what he wanted them to be doing.
Coach Nardo, are you looking forward to Friday night's encounter?
Yeah, I'm looking for Friday night's encounter to be a pretty good ball game, Carter. I don't know how the boys are going to do. I hope they do real well.
Are the rumors true that you have a new game strategy?
No, I don't have no new game strategy. All we do is go out there and just play a good old hard rock, knock, and soft ball game.
How many spring games have you coached at the university?
Well, I wish you wouldn't have asked me that. I don't know. I started back in 1933, and I've been coaching ever since.
Would you like to comment on the rivalry between you and Coach Gary?
Well, the rivalry's getting pretty good. Gary, I always buy Gary a great big T-bone steak every time he wins, so I just like to get even one time.
What will he buy you?
Well, I don't know. If I win, he'll have to buy me a nice big juicy one because I've lost the last 2 or 3 ball games the last 3 years, so I'm going to take and splurge on it.
Coach Andy Nardo was an offensive line coach. He handled all the linemen, including the ends, which was from tackles, guards, center, and ends. And he loved to work with us on blocking. We did more blocking and tackling than anything else when we go to the bullpen.
Coach Nardo was a different sort. While he didn't seek to do these things, if you went to him, he would be helpful. Andy Nardo's the reason I stayed in Chattanooga. I came down and tried out paid my first semester on my own. At the end of spring practice, I had a good spring practice. I went into the room and Scrappy and Andy, Coach Nardo were there, and Scrappy said, "Well, Naftali, you did good, but I don't know how much. I don't think I can give you a whole lot money-wise." I said, "Coach, the only way I can stay here is have a scholarship. I didn't have any money to stay down here. I got to go home." I said, I'm going home." So I walked out the door, and Andy came back. Said, "No, Nubby, hang around here. Hang around. We'll get this thing worked out. We'll get it worked out." And sure enough, I got a scholarship from then. And it was thanks to Andy Nardo that I got a scholarship here.
You know, he's a tough dude, and he was. You know, and I know I got my shoulder dislocated, and Andy used to put it back in. You know, so I mean, you know, you end up playing. You know, so it was he had a gruff, growly voice, but he was really a good person. I mean, you know, he really was. He was really a good person. And he'd get mad, he'd get upset, you know, which any coach does. But he cared about his players. I mean, he cared about his players.
Andy was a lineman coach, and one that we always tell stories about, how he would treat the linemen to make sure that they were ready. He had them ready to play. And he and Coach Moore got along very well. Andy was not a person looking to leave Chattanooga either. His son Andrew's still here, and the family. And I always felt that Coach Moore was an icon as well for line coach. He stayed here with Coach Moore for years and years and years, and he did the wrestling job. And that was a good thing. He had the wrestling program and did a really good job with that. So he built a legend for himself here that was the most positive atmosphere, and we always did like that.
Nardo and Moore, Coach Moore and Coach Nardo, they were buddies, and they, on a shoestring, carried this budget many times. They would go, we ate in a little one of those row houses across the street right here, and the way we ate, Andy would go to the farmer's market and buy the food, buy it up, and then we had people that cooked it up that night. And of course, those two had a great repartee between the two of them in practice and everything. And one day, Scrappy was telling Coach Nardo, Andy, I want those boys a yard apart. In the splits, I want them a yard apart. Okay, so we're playing. And about midway through the practice and scrimmage, he said, Andy, I told you I wanted those boys 36 inches apart. And Nardo says, Coach, make up your mind. Is it 36 inches or a yard? Funny story, but everybody knows it's true.
One of his best friends was Skipper's father. And he not only worked with him, he was a good friend. And they did a lot of things together.
I do think that Nardo completed Scrappy in some ways. I think that Nardo could be the bad cop and Scrappy could be the good cop sometimes. I also think that they had a mutual respect. I think Nardo really learned football from Scrappy and was able to actualize in the coaching that he did the ideals that Scrappy had. And so I think that he could trust Nardo in ways that you would really need to have an element of trust with an assistant coach. And I think that Nardo saw him as a consummate teacher. But I think it's really interesting that Nardo also had opportunities to leave. And assistant coaches really didn't get paid a lot of money. And so for him to have stayed with Coach Moore in the way that he did, I think speaks volumes of their relationship.
He was, again, old school. Tough guy. Tough guy. I mean, he worked those linemen and they were well prepared but he was a big old bear but he was a softy too. Now he wasn't like Coach Moore. Coach Moore was kind of aloof and out of the mix, so to speak. But but Coach Nardo was a very likable guy, and he'd kick you on one side and pat you on the other side. That's the way he was, and the kids really respected him and enjoyed, having him as their coach. But Coach Nardo was a great guy, he was a great wrestling coach too, which a lot of people don't know.
I wrestled for Andy Nardo for 4 years up here, and he was my wrestling coach, and he was just a super guy and mentor for me as well. I felt like I could go to him anytime and ask him anything, and he would be willing to sit down and talk to me about it. And he was a pretty tough guy. He would during wrestling practice, he would sit up in that doorway, and that old wrestling room would get so hot, and you'd just be dying, and you weren't going to get out of that room until he was ready for you to get out of it. It didn't matter how much you were bleeding or anything else. But if he would do anything for you, it was get you in shape.
He had to learn how to be a wrestling coach. You know anything about wrestling, but you learn as you go. And he had good kids.
I think he was a great wrestling coach. He didn't know an awful lot about wrestling, to be quite honest with you, because first of all, I don't think he ever wrestled, but he was an encourager, and if he saw one of us do a good move, he'd stop us and say, "Hey, wait a minute now, what is that you just did?" And he'd say, "How about showing the rest of us that?" And so we really sort of taught ourselves, but it was through his encouragement that we were able to help each other and learn from each other.
Talk about Coach Moore, we're not talking about Coach Andy Nardo either. Coach Nardo was instrumental in everything. He took a liking to me, and he took a liking to several folks. I liked his wrestling program. I never missed one of his wrestling matches at home, and Coach Nardo was indeed a unique individual to me, and was good to me throughout my career there. He was just a fantastic guy that just he was tough, hard-nosed, but he was fair, and he was straight with you.
My dad was he was an Italian American. My mother and my grandmother and my grandfather, they first generation, they came over on the boat. He played, was a good athlete in high school, and he got a scholarship to the university. And he came here and played for Coach Moore. He played on Coach Moore's first team. After that, he graduated from UC, and then he went on to get his master's at Columbia University. And then he stayed here after he graduated from UC. He stayed here and coached for Scrappy for the next 33 years. So they worked together for years. He was a hard worker. He was tough. I mean, he was tough on the field, but he had a heart that's about as big as his campus. And I was fortunate to have wonderful parents. I love my father and I love my mother, and they were just good people. He always told me, he said, you just do what's right. That was his, do what's right. Don't be influenced by people that do the right thing. And it was very simple. If you didn't, there were consequences.
Sandy was the best. Nobody was like Sandy. You love to you go in and just get a massage from Sandy. He was like a father to all of us. He took great care of us, and he was like a doctor to us. He was very much a part of the football program.
Sandy Sandlin, can remember going there after games, and the next morning, we played Saturday, and then the next morning Sandy would put us in the whirlpool and then give us an alcohol rub and all our cuts and screws, and he loved it. He made us hurt, and he would stretch us and twist us, and what a great time to interact with your fellow teammates. And Sandy was truly a stabilizing and wonderful force for the players that were there.
Like a father to me. Sandy I'd have lunch with all the time. We would come over to the training room and he was the nicest, gentlest guy that's ever been, and everybody loved Sandy. I remember at my wedding, he was such a character, and he came over and said, "You sure you want to do this?" So, but Sandy Sandlin was he was very special to me.
My job was mainly working with Sandy Sandlin, who was the head trainer. I was just his right-hand man. We taped ankles and, took care of the injuries and all of that. He was the nicest man that I think I've ever met. He was always there for you. You always felt like you could come to him and talk to him about different things that might be bothering you or whatever, but and he was a very good trainer. He took care of the guys and always seemed like he enjoyed his job so much. I mean, I never once heard him complain about anything. I love the guy. I just loved Sandy Sandlin.
Sandy probably was one of the deepest loves that we had. Sandy was like the real father, and he became a friend that was really deep in our hearts. And we felt like he cared for us and he loved us, and that was a wonderful experience to be with him for all those years we were.
Sandy kind of kept it all together. Like I said, Sandy was somebody that we could all come to and talk to, and he'd look after you and smooth things over when things got tough.
Well, Sandy was a character. I mean, he was your friend.
That's right.
He always called you a pal.
That's right.
The coaches were on your butt pretty good, and one day you're feeling pretty low, hey pal, he'd pump you up.
Yeah.
And so you might say he was a spiritual healer too.
Yes, sir.
As well as a physical healer.
I agree with you.
So Sandy was, he was just a good person, just like the coaches.
My senior year, we were getting ready to play Tennessee, and I wanted to play against my brother. And that was the first game that we played with Tennessee, opened up that year. I hurt my knee on Monday, and I had a hard time, Tuesday walking. And on Tuesday, my backup, he gets hurt, and he's even worse than me. He's gone. He could operate on. Coach Moore calls me in his office, and he says, "Jim," he has that high voice. He says, "Jim," he says, Ed Susdorf got hurt?" I said, "Yes, sir." He says, "Well, you've got to play." And I said, "Well, Coach, I want to play." He said, "Well, you get in that training room and you stay there the daylight to dark." I said, "You understand that?" I said, "Yes, sir." So I get in that training room, and Sandy, of course I had to go to class and stuff like that, but when I wasn't there, I was at the training room, and Sandy, work on me. And we get to Tennessee, because my parents were coming down too. That's the first time they ever seen me play. And so he says, "Come on, let's go outside and work." So we went outside and we worked. I ran things, did some things, and some drills that he sent me through, and I felt good. You know, he said, I felt good. He said, well, you're moving good. I said, I knew I was going to play. So I played.
He knew more about rehab than I think people do now. He did a lot of stuff. He didn't have all the ultrasound stuff, but he did a great deal.
Sandy Sandlin, a wonderful man. I don't say that because he was good to me. He wasn't any better to me, except he was always civil to me, and my mother just loved him. She just thought he was the greatest person.
Sandy was a big part of the UTC family.
He was trusted by everyone. I think that was the big thing, the respect the players had for Sandy. He was mild talking. I heard him raise his voice one time, and he actually made a freshman cry. We were in the locker room and getting taped up. It was after we were hurting, and there's this freshman come in, and he was wanting some attention. You know, this ball player was wanting some attention, and Sandy finally said, look, when you earn your spot, I'll give you that attention. Right now, I'm taking care of these players. And the kid, I feel so bad for him now. The kid just started crying. You know, tears came up in his eyes. But that's the only time I heard Sandy do anything like that.
Sandy Sandlin was, clearly somebody was smart in relationship to being a trainer and doing the kind of things that trainers did. But I think that he pretty much ran the behind-the-scenes shop for Scrappy. And so I think he was here every day working with the athletes. I think today he would probably be as much of a psychological coach as he was a physical fitness coach. And I think that between Coach Moore and Coach Nardo and Sandy Sandlin, I think you had kind of a triumvirate, that it's almost like if one of them spoke, they were speaking for all three. And they knew each other's backs and had each other's backs so well that I think that he was a huge compliment to everything they did.
They stayed together from the time they came here. It's really a unique situation. No one ever left. And that's just, I think, you'd have to give a lot of credit to Coach Moore for being able to keep these people here. And they were all good coaches, very fine, outstanding coaches, could have been probably head coaches at other schools. But they stayed here, and I think that Coach Moore was that type of person, because once you meet him and he just gravitated to you, and you gravitated to him also.
We had great coaches. We had good human beings, and they cared about the players. They cared about, what happened to them after they graduated, and they cared that they did graduate. Yeah. And some didn't, but those that didn't, some of them went on to do very well, and but most of them did, and they cared about that. It was important to them. Some people might think that it was a very impersonal thing. It was just football. It wasn't. No. It was more about people too. It was just as much about people as it was about football. We had great coaches.